In the days of ancient Rome, when Gaius Julius Caesar met his infamous and gruesome end, his murderers hoped that his death would return their right to rule and restore the former glory of their republic. In truth, the lower and middle classes became enraged that the senators, who were viewed as corrupt and greedy, had assassinated their beloved champion. A man named Marc Antony, who had been a former military commander in Gaul, as well as Caesar's co-consul, capitalized on the brimming tension of the people at Caesar's funeral oration. Antony whipped the crowd into a frenzy, and the riots that ensued severely damaged the forums as well as the houses of several of the conspirators who fled the city. Thus the reins of Rome were wrested from the hands of the Senate, and within the next few years, all hope for the resurrection of the Republic would be extinguished. I believe that Marc Antony's speech was a catalyst for the death of the Republic and the rise of the greatest empire in ancient history, as evidenced by both the immediate and long-term effects it had as a turning point in Rome's history. To truly understand the significance of Antony's speech, you must know what his speech actually was. The most widely believed historical report of what was spoken at Caesar's funeral oration is provided by the great historian Appian of Alexandria. Appian's rendering is generally accepted as an accurate account of the events that transpired during Caesar's burial. According to this account, Marc Antony was chosen to deliver Caesar's funeral oration, as he had been cleared as a threat by the Senate. They had believed that Antony had been nothing more than a puppet who dwelled within Caesar's massive shadow. What they did not realize was that Antony had interpreted the unrest of the people much better than they had. He knew the people were in a state of shock, as if they couldn't believe what had happened. To the middle and lower classes, Caesar had been something of a hero, and now they were being told that he was a tyrant and that his death was necessary for the survival of the Republic. To capitalize on this, Antony presented a speech at the oration with the intention of enraging the crowd. Antony spoke at length about Caesar's titles, which were no easy feat to gain in Roman society. Julius was so revered by Rome that at one point he had been declared inviolate, which means that he was so favored by the gods that an attack upon his being would be seen as a crime against them as well as a heresy. Appian wrote, and again he read out the oaths by which they all undertook to protect Caesar and Caesar's person with all their might, and if anyone should conspire against him, those who failed to defend him were to be accursed. This sent the mob that had gathered into a tumultuous chaos. The common people of Rome were extremely superstitious, and a failure to uphold an oath promised to the gods was almost as terrible as an outright death sentence. Antony had also come prepared with something that was rarely ever witnessed in Roman society: visual evidence. Sometimes it is hard for us to understand just how powerful a physical display of evidence can be in a world without videos or photographs. As the crowd milled about, restless and angry, Antony revealed a wax effigy of Caesar himself. Inflicted on the effigy were 23 wounds on every part of the body and face, to imitate how Caesar had met his own demise. In addition, the bloody toga that Caesar had worn on the day of his assassination was raised up for all to see. Pointedly heart-rending evidence was finally visible, and seemed much more tangible than the empty promises of freedom given by the conspirators. The people could bear it no longer. Howling and lamenting, they surrounded the Senate house and burnt it down. Without Antony's speech, it is very feasible that the people would not have risen up against the Senate, which would have considerably changed Rome's fate. The events that followed immediately after Antony's speech were soaked in blood. Several renowned historians, including Appian, as well as the famous Roman writers Suetonius and Plutarch, have written about what became known as the Liberators' Civil War, which was started by the Second Triumvirate to avenge Caesar's death. The Second Triumvirate consisted of Marc Antony, a general from Gaul named Lepidus, and Caesar's adopted son Octavian. It should be noted that Octavian's rise to power owes its start to Antony's speech. Octavian, in a rather bold move, intended to head straight to Rome after he heard the news of his adoptive father's murder. If Antony had not forced the Senate from the Eternal City, Octavian would almost surely have been killed, as he had few bodyguards and next to no political power. With their newly cemented alliance, the Second Triumvirate dedicated itself to wiping out the forces of the conspirators, who held the provinces of Greece and Africa. Through many trials and plenty of bloodshed, the Second Triumvirate was able to best the armies of the Senate, culminating their triumph in a final victory at the fortress of Philippi. It should be noted that none of the senators that conspired to kill Caesar died of natural causes, a fate that they surely could not have foreseen when they allowed Antony to give Caesar's funeral oration. But the most powerful impact of Antony's funeral oration was yet to come. In the years after the Liberators' Civil War, relations soured between the three triumvirs. each of whom believed Rome was theirs to rule. Lepidus was quickly exiled from the triumvirate in 36 BC, his holdings divided between the two remaining leaders of Rome. According to Suetonius and Strabo, a Greek philosopher and historian who lived during this time period, there was a time of peace, though it was more aptly to be described as the calm before the storm. Antony was engaged in an affair with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, though he was married to Octavian's sister, Octavia Minor. Octavian used this knowledge to enact a smear campaign against his former ally. Octavian's chance to revoke Antony's power came when Antony married Cleopatra in 32 BC. In doing so, he also ceded much of Rome's territory to Egypt, and had also named Cleopatra's son Caesarion, who was actually a bastard sired by Julius Caesar, as co-ruler of Egypt along with his mother. Octavian convinced the Senate to declare war on Cleopatra, with the full knowledge that Antony would be forced to play his hand. Antony chose to support Egypt and was quickly branded a traitor, just as Octavian had planned. In the years that followed, the two powerhouses of Rome engaged in what would be called the Final War of the Republic. In a series of naval and land victories, Octavian gradually managed to beat his adversary. In fact, when Octavian landed in Alexandria, Antony's remaining army surrendered without any engagement. Antony fell on his sword soon after. In the aftermath of Antony's defeat and death, Octavian was ruthless in stamping out any chances of further opposition. Cleopatra begged that her son's life be spared, and in return she would willingly surrender herself to him. Octavian refused, and instead informed Cleopatra that she would be taken back to Rome to play a part in his triumph, a parade given to a general who would be returned victorious from the war. In addition, Octavian had Caesarion brutally murdered, and, in Strabo's account of events, he famously said, "Two Caesars are one too many." Cleopatra poisoned herself not long afterward. Octavian's right to rule was now uncontested. Within a month, he was renamed Augustus Caesar and was given unlimited power by the Senate. This was the death of the Roman Republic and its rebirth as an empire. In a stroke of irony, Antony's speech was eventually responsible for his own death, as well as his killer's rise to ultimate power. If Antony had not been able to turn the Roman mob on the senators, Octavian would have almost certainly been killed. Instead, the young upstart was able to gain a foothold in the chaos that had formed while Rome remained without a ruler. To say that Antony had foreseen the events his speech would have on his people and the future of his nation would be foolish. In fact, it is speculated by some that he only thought his oration would cause the lower classes to denounce the Senate, not cause them to form a mob and go on a city-wide rampage. Whether he realized it or not, Antony's speech shook the very foundations of the ancient world. His funeral oration served instrumental in the death of the Republic and was also a pivotal point in Rome's history.